Hi, thanks for joining. In this video, we're going to talk about custom post output, which is a custom process you can build on top of your outputs in DataForge so that every time your output runs, it then also runs a custom notebook shortly after. So if we get started here when we're looking at our sources page within our DataForge workspace, the first thing that I'm going to do is actually just create an example output. So if you already have an output to work with, you can skip this step. But I'm going to quickly create one here and just call it Sales Nation Data. And I'm going to set it to a virtual output, so it just creates a SQL view in Databricks that we can use. I'll call it Nation Data. And then if you're actually creating the custom post output process, you're going to want to switch this over to custom notebook. I'm going to come back to that shortly once I've got my output all set up. So if I add a source in here, we're going to use this custom ingestion nation source. I'm going to map all of my source columns here, and then I'm going to actually just reset this channel output so that I know that that view gets created. So while that's actually running, we can go ahead and start getting everything set up in Databricks. So what I'm going to do is from the main menu, I'm going to open Databricks. In the Compute tab, we want to make sure that our all-purpose cluster is running. So I've got this DataForge SDK cluster. I'm working in an AWS environment, so I've attached the instance profile. And then most importantly, I've attached the DataForge SDK jar in here. And just as a quick reminder, if you don't remember where to find this jar location, you can look up the DataForge SDK documentation. So if you hit documentation from the main menu and search for SDK, you can open this custom notebook SDK and then follow along with the all-purpose cluster instructions here. So going back to DataForge, the next thing that I want to do is actually create my notebook that I'm going to use. So I'm going to create that in my shared folder here. So we'll create a new notebook. I'm going to give this a name, and I'm just going to call it custom post output for now. And then similar to all the other custom processes, we're going to want to copy the notebook path, which we can get by hovering over the notebook name here. So we can copy that path out and go back to DataForge. And now that I have that notebook set up, I can go to my settings on my output. I'm going to switch this to custom notebook. And now you can see we've got that cluster config drop down to set up a cluster config for the custom post output process. So I'm going to set it up using this little icon here. And we'll call this custom post output notebook. And then I'm going to switch my scale mode to single node, limit the compute while I'm developing. And then if I switch the job task type to custom notebook, that allows me to then paste in that specific notebook path. So I'm going to save these cluster config settings, and now I can go back to my output and we can refresh the cluster configs available, and I can see my new post output config, and I can save that in my output settings. Okay, so now that we've got the output set up and we've got the original outputs already run, I've got a view to work with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my documentation, and just as a starting point, I'm going to navigate to the custom post output, and I'm going to copy this example code here. I'll put that in my notebook, and we can see that it's just a simple hello world right now. So what I'm going to do is just take that out. And then from each line in here, what we're doing is we're importing the DataForge SDK, just like all the other custom processes. And then we set up a new val and name it session. We set that equal to new post output session. And then within the post output session, you can see that there are 3 different pieces of information that we provide context. So these are required if you're running this notebook directly from Databricks, so that DataForge has context of which output and which channel to go run this on. If you're running it from DataForge, however, from more of like a production instance, you can just remove these 3 pieces of information because we'll already have that context of where the notebook run is coming from. So to populate these, I'm just going to go back to my output. I'll copy the output name, replace that in here. I'm going to go copy my channel name. So in the mapping, we've got our channel name here. So I'll paste that in. And then lastly, our project name, and our project again is training in this case. So I'm going to replace this with training. And now what I'm going to do is actually just build some simple example logic to create an additional SQL view in Databricks. So using the existing view that we already have from our virtual output, I'm going to start by creating this function in here, just a post output function that'll return a unit. And this is where custom post output varies from the other custom processes slightly, in that you don't need to return a data frame to DataForge. We're just doing any custom logic that you want, whether it's interacting with another API, creating additional tables or views like I'm doing here, and so on. So whatever custom logic you've got, you can build in here. So I'm going to use spark.sql, and then I'm just going to do create or replace view, and we'll call it custom post output. And then I'm actually going to do it as a select statement from that virtual view that we create in the normal output process. And so how I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to make use of two process parameters. So if we go back to our output, the two things that I'm going to reference are the view name and then the view database. You can see that since this isn't populated, it's just going to be coming from the default, but I can still reference this parameter here. So if I add in two new vals here, and I set it to, we'll start with database. So we go view.database or view database, and then we reference the parameters the same as the other custom processes. So we do session.process parameters within the parentheses. We do a backslash, and then we actually give the parameter name. And I'm going to save it as a string. And then we'll build the second one, which is the virtual view name. And again, I'm pulling this from process parameters. So backslash, and then it'll be view name is the parameter name. So we're going to save that, and then I'm just going to finish up creating my select statement here. So it'll just be view database, and then dot view name virtual view. Here we go. Cool. So now I've got my working post output notebook, and so I can actually run this directly from Databricks because I provided that context on which output channel and project we're running. So if I run this now, we can see it started running the process and it's completed. So just to show you what this looks like, if I was to go back to DataForge and go to my source, when I look at my process, I can see that custom post output process was triggered here, triggered by a parallel universe, again, just because it's been triggered directly from the notebook, and DataForge doesn't necessarily know exactly the context of where, it just knows what to do. So if this was run from DataForge, it would show basically right after the output process in the process flow. So that we know we've got a working notebook now. Now what we can do is add a little bit more customization to the notebook. So we worked with process parameters. The next set of parameters that I want to show you is the custom parameters. So what we're going to do is actually go back to our output again. And the unique thing about custom post output is there's actually two different sets of custom parameters. The first is going to be on the overall output. So you'll find that in the output settings, you expand the output parameters, and you see these custom parameters here. So what we'll do is we'll add a parameter in here called tag, and we'll say this is going to be sales. We'll say sales data. And I'll save that to the output. And so now that shows up in my JSON formatted field here. And then the other place that you can add custom parameters is actually in each individual channel. So if you were looking at your mapping page, you can open the channel settings. And then if you expand the output source parameters here, you can add an additional set of custom parameters. So in this one, instead of sales data as the tag, I actually want to tag this as this is specifically coming from nation. So I'm going to save this. And now if we go back to our output, we can build those into our logic. So again, I'll add a new val, this one I'm going to say is custom param, and we're going to reference it similarly. So within parentheses we'll do session dot and we'll do custom parameters with the backslash, and then here our syntax is slightly different, where we have a reference to the output config specifically. So right now I'm referencing that broader custom parameter, and we're going to reference the tag, and I'll save that as a string. And then I'll add one more val, which is going to be our custom channel param. And again, it's going to be very similar looking in the way that we reference it. However, this time, instead of output, we're going to reference it from the output channel that's running. And so we'll close that out by referencing the custom tag parameter. I'll save that as a string. And then what I'm going to do is actually update my view. So what I want to do is keep this all the way up until the select star, and then I'm going to add in a reference to each custom parameter. So we'll call this one output tag, and then we'll call the next one channel param. We'll call this the channel tag. Okay. So now we've again got our working notebook. We've added in two different sets of custom parameters that we're referencing, one on the output, and that's referencing the output setting parameter here, the custom. And then we've got our second parameter, which is directly from the channel, and that's coming from the mapping and the channel settings, so in here. So now if we run this again, we can hopefully make sure it works. Very cool. And now just to confirm, we can actually check our output view that we created here. So this is, since I didn't reference it specifically, creating it in the, yep, there it is, creating it specifically in the Hive Meta Store in the default, but obviously I could have customized this a little bit further. But we can see the new columns that we referenced directly from those custom parameters. So again, just using the parameters, you can really operationalize these notebooks and make them scalable. So I could use this across many different outputs to create different views of my data as I'm running it. And all I would have to do is change around my parameters within either my channel, if I had multiple channels, or in the output if I was creating multiple different outputs. And so that's how you'll really use the custom post output. Obviously, there's really no limitations on what you can do with this. If you can build it in a Databricks notebook, you can then attach it to your output process. The last thing that you'll want to do here, once you've really finished up working on your notebook and you know it's working, is to remove that context that we added within the post output session. And so then when we run it directly from DataForge, we can run it from whichever output, whichever setting. I can run that here, and I don't have to have that specified because it'll actually know the context based on those process and custom parameters that we built. So we remove that context, and now we're all ready to go. So hopefully you like the training. If you have any feedback or questions, please reach out. Thank you.